on the last module applies here as well, as we saw before. And what we're going to see is we're going to see lots and lots of patterns or paradigms. I tend to call them paradigms in Hebrew. And what I want to do here is give you a roadmap or a grid so that you can place these different paradigms as we come across them. I think it'll help to keep it straight. Otherwise, it could get a bit confusing. So let me draw something down here. Let's put it right here. The first thing we're going to see, in fact, in the very next module, is the perfect. The perfect is a verb paradigm, and it's basically used for your simple past tense. At least usually that's how it's translated. It has other purposes as well, but we'll talk about that in due course. The perfect is the first thing. A little later, we're going to talk about the imperfect. Imperfect. This is another verb form, and what I want to show you here is how they fit into a grid. Let's make a grid like this. So we have a vertical axis. We also have a horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, going down here, we're going to have what we call forms. Forms, or some people call these tenses. Technically, strictly speaking, they're not all tenses. Tenses. So forms is a better way to talk about it, but sometimes it's supposed to be an O here, forms. Sometimes you'll hear tenses, or maybe I'll say that. The perfect fits up here in the top left. Along the top here are something called stems. Oh, this is terrible. Stems. Or binyan. I'll probably use the word binyan just because I'm used to that. This is the Hebrew word. Binyan or binyanim for the plural. Binyan comes from bana, which means to build or to construct. Okay, let me talk about this row first, or this column, then we'll talk about the rows going across. Sorry, I guess we're talking about rows as we go down. We'll talk about the columns afterwards. These forms, as we go down here, we're going to come across a few of them. First, we'll deal with the perfect, like I said. The imperfect, we'll come across volative forms, which are forms that we use for things like imperatives, which are commands, or wishes, let us go here, or let him do something. We'll talk about participles. We'll talk about infinitives. And we're going to spend a number of chapters going through all these forms. So there's a whole chapter dedicated to perfect. In fact, if you're following in Ross's grammar, and these modules are, so our sequence will be the same. Chapter 10 is dealing with perfect. What we'll deal with next, down here in the list, in chapter 16, we'll deal with participles. And then chapter 17, we'll deal with the imperfect. And then in chapter 20, we'll deal with all the volatives, the imperatives, and what they call justives and cohortatives, which are ways to talk about what you wish will happen. And then finally, we'll talk about, in chapter 22, we'll talk about the infinitives. So we spent a lot of time going through this very carefully. Now, what happens is, you then take this whole pattern, or all these patterns, all these paradigms, and you repeat them. Repeat them by changing something to the root. This will have the same root all the way through, and we use a root or a paradigm word. We use pakad. So this will be our root word that will go through all these different forms. We'll just take the same three letters and we'll put all the different prefixes, suffixes, infixes, and vowels on them. As we move across here, though, once we've done this whole list, as we move across here, then we'll encounter these different binyan, or stems. And what's different about them is that you add a consonant. You have some consonantal change to the root. You add a consonant to the root. For instance, the first one we'll deal with after the basic form is something called the nifal. We add a nun. So a nun is a prefix. And there are other prefixes in here, but this is a nun that's going to be added to everything in this column. So we're going to have the nifal. We're going to have other binyan that double letters or that add yit or hit or hey. There's actually 7 in total. So we have our basic one. The basic one is called kal, which means light. Light meaning it doesn't have extra consonants added to the root, like the nifal. And then we have 6 others, so 7 in total. Now, I told you here we're going to deal with this chapter 10, chapter 17, 16, whatever. A whole bunch of different chapters dedicated to this, and in between we'll deal with other noun issues. But these here, this we'll deal with in chapter, 26. And then we'll deal with something called the Piel in chapter 27. And then each one of these is one chapter, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. So these are going to come thick and fast. What took you a long time to go through this is now going to go quickly. But these are just variations on the theme. You add nun and there's some changes. And you add, or you double a letter and there's some changes to this. These binyan are all built on this. So I'm telling you all this for 2 reasons. One is, I want you to have a grid in your mind so that as we encounter different paradigms, like the perfect for instance, you encounter the perfect, you know where it sits in the grid. So you can keep it straight in your head. That's the first thing. Secondly, I want you to realize how much time we're spending on this column and why. We're spending lots of time here because these are just going to build on this. So what that means is that if you want to learn Hebrew efficiently, if you want to save yourself frustration, you'll learn this column really, really well. If you learn this well, then these will follow fairly easily. If you don't know this well, when you get the variations, you're going to start to get confused. It's going to start to get muddled. Because now you're going to see, okay, you got a variation, and there's some things look same, some things look different, and it's going to get muddled in your head. So, just a word to the wise. Learn this and learn it well. And then your life will be considerably easier. Okay, anything else I want to add here? Consonantal changes to our binyan. We have vowels and prefixes, suffixes down here. No, I think that's okay. So we're going to start. The next module is going to deal with the perfect. And we'll take a look at that paradigm in detail.
Yep.
Ja.
Nou, zijn jullie er klaar voor?
Nou, laten we het maar proberen. Maar ik moet zeggen dat het moeilijk lukt om wat in me op te nemen.
Dat snap ik. Daar hebben we ook alle begrip voor.
Mhm.
Desnoods herhalen we volgende week gewoon nog een keer.
Ja, daarom.
Ja, daarom.
Maar ons eigen tempo. Dus,
wij kunnen dat zelf goed gebruiken. Oké. Dan gaan we nu naar de perfect tense is dus de tijd die reeds voltooid is. Vandaar dat het in het Engels de volmaakte tijd wordt genoemd. En de onvolmaakte tijd is dus de tijd die nog voltooid moet worden. Dat klinkt bij ons in het hoofd in het gek, maar de tegenwoordige tijd is dus imperfect, omdat die nog niet afgerond is. En de verleden tijd is reeds afgerond. Dus als je de eenvoudige verleden tijd hebt, de basis de verleden tijd, niet de voltooid tegenwoordig toekomende tijd of weet ik wat voor tijden er allemaal zijn, heel veel. Dat die tijden dus in het Engels en ook in het Latijn blijkbaar, dus de perfect tense is dus de verleden tijd, de eenvoudige verleden tijd. En dat is ook logisch, omdat in het Hebreeuws er verhalend verteld wordt. Want het begint al met, in het begin schiep God. Dat is verleden tijd. En hij zei, laat ons mensen maken. Dat is dan weer toekomende tijd. Maar... En God vormde, dus dan is het al voltooid. Snap je? Dus vandaar dat het logisch is dat de perfect tense de basis vormt in het Hebreeuws, in het Bijbels Hebreeuws althans.
Perfect tense. Okay, let's look at the paradigm for the perfect tense. Now, if you remember our noun paradigms, we had gender and number. So we had a grid for nouns, something like this. Masculine and feminine down one side, and then across the top we had number, singular and plural. We had dual as well. We won't worry with dual for the verbs. So we had gender and we had number. Now verbs have, in addition, something called person. First, second, and third person. And generally we talk about it in this order: PGN, person, gender, number. So what we'll do here for our chart for verbs, let's draw a line here just to make it clear. We'll have third person with masculine, feminine, singular, and plural. And then we'll have second person with masculine, feminine, and singular and plural as well, a grid. Four pieces here and four there. And then we'll have, let's actually extend this a bit. Then we'll have first person. Now first person has no distinction in gender, so it's just common. What you call common when it's the same form for masculine and singular. Okay. Now the reason that we go 3, 2, 1, third person is he, second person is you, first person is I. It's a bit odd. In most other languages where you do paradigms, at least Western languages, we tend to go 1, 2, 3. The reason is because this form here, the third masculine singular form, is the base form that the rest of the paradigm is built on, and it's also the form of the verb that you find in the dictionary. So if you've studied Greek or Latin, then this is going to feel a little bit backwards, but you get used to it. So we'll just do our translation here quickly. Let's change colors. I'll go to yellow. So third masculine singular is he. So he ran, a verb that would have he as a subject. And we'll see that the subject is embedded right into the verb. The ending, in this case, for the perfect, will include or will indicate that it's 3ms. So you have the subject embedded right there. So third feminine singular would be she. He could also be it, and she could be it if you're talking about an inanimate object that is feminine or that is masculine. Plural, we have they. Now in this paradigm, the perfect paradigm, there is no distinction in masculine, and there's no distinction in gender, no masculine feminine distinction in the plural. And so, let me change back to white. This is just referred to as C. So this would be 3CP, third common plural. When you get to the imperfect, which is the next paradigm, the one that's listed under the perfect, in our column that's on the far left, the one I mentioned before in the big roadmap, the imperfect does distinguish gender in the plural, third person plural. So you have 3MP and 3FP, third feminine plural. In the perfect, we just have 3CP, one form. So no form here. Or this will do for both. You, 2MS is you. So you're talking to a guy, single guy, or not single meaning by himself. 2FS, again, you. In English, you would simply say you, whether you're talking to a guy or a girl, a boy or a girl, or a man or a woman. Plural, in English, we also just simply say you, whether you're talking to men, or you, if you're talking to women. So in English, we do not make a distinction in gender or in number for the second person. We just use you all around. Unless you include y'all as part of your vocabulary, in which case there's a distinction between singular and plural. Y'all meaning talking to a group of people. But other than that, these are all the same. In Hebrew, however, we make a distinction between singular and plural, different forms, as does Greek, as does French, and German and Latin. We also, however, distinguish gender in the second person, and this is something that these other classical languages don't do. So if you study these other languages, this may seem a bit odd. I had someone tell me once, a former teacher actually, who speaks modern Hebrew and lives in Israel. He says that when you phone someone, if a child picks up the phone, you find yourself sometimes in an awkward position because you can't tell over the phone whether the child is a boy or a girl. But you want to speak to them, and so you have to decide quite quickly whether you're going to use masculine forms of the second person or feminine. Could you get your mother or something like that? You'd have to make a decision. And sometimes you don't know, so that's kind of funny, but we don't have that problem in English. Okay, so that's second person. First person, there's no distinction in gender, so we just use I for the singular, and we use we. These are the translations. We for the plural. So this is the paradigm grid that we will use for the perfect and for the imperfect. As we move down the forms, some of them won't have all these parts. This is the most complete one. And when you move into participles and infinitives, well, participles don't have person because they're a bit more like a noun, and infinitives don't have any of this, so they're even simpler. But this is the fullest form, and we'll list them in this way. Singulars over here, plurals over here, starting with third, second, and first person, and then for each of these two, it'll be masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine. Okay, let us actually do the perfect now. I keep saying we're going to do the perfect and then doing something else. Well, let's do the perfect for real. We'll look at each paradigm. Let's see. Yeah, let's write this up. Now I want to get this all one page, so I'm going to start up here. So, pakad. This is a patach, okay? A bit longer. The comments. Now, pakad is our paradigm word. We're going to use this for all our forms and all our binyan. It means to visit or to appoint. That doesn't really matter for this. We're just using it as a placeholder word. And what's going to happen is, as you learn these paradigms, when you come across other words, you'll just put that word in this form. Now, one thing about our paradigm word, here, pakad, is that the first letter is the Begad Kafat letter. Pei is the Begad Kafat letter. So it can take a Dagash Lene, if you remember back to our module on Begad Kafat letters and the different types of Dagesh, of Dagashim. If there is nothing before it, no vowel, then it takes the dot. It's a P. If there is something before it, it's a F. Different pronunciation. So forms that have prefixes, you'll find that this will sometimes not have this Dagesh if it's got a prefix with a vowel before it. If there's nothing, then it'll be P. Now that's just a feature of this word. It's not really part of the paradigm. So if you substitute a word in there that doesn't have a Begad Kafat letter as the first one, then you won't have this issue. I just pointed out it's not a big deal. But this dot is not a Dagesh forte. It's a Dagesh Lene. Okay, pakad. This is the 3ms form, right? Let me just go back for a second. We're talking this quadrant here, this corner, 3ms. And this, like I said, is the basic form that everything's built on. So pakad is the basic form. Let us do the next one. If this is third masculine singular column, then the next one would be third feminine singular. And I want to try to get everything on this page, so what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to start with the root letters. Let's put the ending on. The ending for 3fs, third feminine singular, happens to be a, which should remind you of something. It's the same ending as the feminine singular for nouns. So that's a nice correspondence that feminine here matches that. So third person, feminine singular has the a ending. Now what happens here is this is a vowel suffix. This had no suffix. Here we're adding a vowel suffix. And if you remember, we can't have a syllable starting with a vowel in Hebrew. We can have CV, and we can have CVC, but we can't have V or VC or anything like that. So this vowel has to steal this last root letter to make a syllable, and so our syllable division falls here. Now in pakad we have two syllables. We have pa, kad, and so this closed this syllable. The dalet closed the syllable. This was a closed syllable here. Here now it opens the next one, so it breaks this syllable up. And what happens is this one stays. We'll put our Dagashlana here. The reason this stays here, this stays normal, is because the comets is an important part of the perfect tense. There will be two forms we'll see, they'll be sitting down here, where that gets reduced. But if possible, it wants to stay because it's an important part of this, of recognizing this tense. And so if you're going to leave this here, how should I explain this? If you made this a closed syllable, so you've taken this for this syllable, if you make this a closed syllable, then this is going to have to be a kametz hatuf, because it is in a closed, CVC, unstressed, because the stress is over here, syllable. And when you see this symbol in a closed, unstressed syllable, that's a kametz hatuf, if you remember your rules. So we don't want it to be a kametz hatuf, we want it to maintain its long A status. So we put a metheg in. Remember the metheg lesson? Metheg means this vowel retains its full status as a long A. It also means, by implication, that we're effectively closing the syllable. We have a syllable marker here. And it means, also by implication, if you forget, go back to those modules, it also means that the next shava, if there is one, is going to be vocal. Okay. What does all this mean? What this means is that we pronounce this pa-ki-da. This is pakad, this one's pakada. Our vocalic ending has split this last syllable and formed three in total. Now that's the explanation for this.
Even een koffiepauze. Is dit duidelijk wat hij doet?
Jawel.
Ja? Oké, dan even checken dat iedereen nog kan volgen wat er gebeurt en dat het shawak komt en dat hij dan vocaal is, omdat dus die hele les van die indeling van die lettergrepen is dus super belangrijk. Hè? Gelukkig hebben we die vaak genoeg herhaald, dus we weten het nog. Ik ga weer door. Als je trouwens even wil pauzeren of zeggen van nou, ik heb een vraag, moet je dat gewoon doen, want misschien komen we er gezamenlijk uit.
The way you're going to memorize this, the way I suggest you memorize it, is simply learn it orally. Learn to say it. You say pakad, pakada. You don't have to worry about all these details. You'll probably forget them. You can come back and listen to it later or read it up or whatever. But just know how to say it, and you'll be fine. It's especially important because later on, when you get into reading the Bible, especially the BHS, which is the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, the main critical edition of the Hebrew Bible, they will leave this metheg off in the verb forms, just because it's so common. And then you don't want to misread it and read pokda or something. You want to read pakada. So, I'm going to just pull this off because I want to keep a clean slate here as much as possible. Pakad, pakada. Then, our next one, so now we finished third person, we're on to second person masculine singular. And this, we'll put our Dagesh Lenny right in. Pa, kad. And I'll add the ending, the masculine, the second person masculine ending, singular ending, is ta. Okay? And so we need to close this syllable with a silent shava. And what happens here is that the stress actually stays on this syllable, which is where it was here. Here we didn't need to mark it because it was on the last syllable. But here it stays there. This does not pull it over. Okay? The ta ending, this is a CV ending. This was a V suffix, this is a CV suffix. It does not pull the stress over. So this one's really simple. You just take the 3MS form right here, and you tack on the ending, which is ta. You don't change anything in here. Okay. Next one. This one is the 2fs. This is 2ms. This is 2fs, feminine. Same kind of treatment. Pakad, and the ending, the suffix, is t. And we'll close this off. Actually, I'm not sure if you marked this here like this or not. Now, this one is a bit odd. What you have here are two silent shavas. And so this isn't really a syllable by itself because this is a silent shava. So the way you read this is pakad. This is pakadta, pakadta. This is pakad. And you read all these three consonants together as if they were one syllable. It kind of goes against the rules, but what's happening here is that historically there was a Hittite yud here, and it's been lost. So this is a bit different, this one here. But in terms of how you add the endings, you can think of it as a CV. I'm going to write it like this. I don't want to write CV. Someone's going to call me or email me and say, oh, you made a mistake. So it's not really a V, CV, but it functions as if it is because you don't change anything here, just like here. You just use the 3ms form, you put it in here, you put it in here, and you add the endings. Okay. Now let's look at the first person, which you only have one. So you have pa. Okay, that's normal. Ad. And actually we close that syllable and we add the ending, and the ending is T. And our stress stays here. So just like this one here. Pakadti. This is our 1CS ending. So these three are nice and normal in terms of how you construct them. Use the 3ms form, add the endings, don't change, don't make any reductions anywhere. Okay, that's our singular. Let's look at the plural. The plural is pa, and let me just not write the vowels for a moment. The suffix is u. Okay. Now that is a vowel suffix, just like this one. This was a, this is u. So if we just add a vowel, we're going to have the same treatment here. This is going to steal this. You're going to break the syllable here. This wants to stay, so this has to become a vocal shava. You have your little method here. You got 3 syllables. Pakada, pakadu. This is called pretonic reduction. Remember, our tonic syllable is the syllable that has the tone on it. So the last one here, because it's not marked otherwise, so it's this one. Pretonic is the one just before it. Remember, propretonic is 2 off from the tone syllable. That's over here. But pretonic is 1 off, 1 behind the tonic syllable. So this one is reduced, and this is reduced. Pretonic reduction on these two. Okay, we have nothing here. In this form, in this paradigm, it's 3CP, so common, no distinction in gender. Now down here, I'm going to have to, this is a longer one, so let me make sure I got enough room. Oh, it looks like a schwa or something. Redo that.
Yeah.
Okay, put our Dagesh Leni in. Let's put our root letters in first. Pakad. Now what the ending is here, this by the way is the 2MP. So we're talking to a bunch of guys. Second person, masculine plural. And the ending is tem. I know it's a bit crowded here, but you can see some space there. Now this is a heavy ending. This is CVC. We've had a V ending, V suffix, a vocalic suffix to these two. No suffix here, vocalic here. These are all CV, or at least you can think of them as CV. If you want to think of this one as CV. This is CVC. Now this behaves just like adding a plural ending to a noun, like davar. Davar becomes devarim. Remember that with our nouns? It's called propretonic reduction. So you add this. It's its own syllable in its own right. It doesn't need to steal the dalet because it already has a consonant at the beginning of its syllable. And so we have three things: this syllable, and this one. And in the propritonic position, we had a comets. And remember our rule: if there's a comets or tsere in the propritonic position, it will reduce to a shva. And in fact, that's precisely what happens. So we have p, and this is the same as that, pukad. We have to add a silent shava to mark the end of the syllable. We didn't need it here because it was the end of the word, but if you're going to add something on the end and still have it at the end of the syllable, you need to mark it. So that's why we have this, just like here. These are just silent shavas. And we don't need to mark the stress because the stress goes over here. This pulled the stress all the way over. So, pukad tem, heavy ending. Now the 2FS, 2FP, sorry, the plural, second feminine plural, is exactly the same, except the ending has a nun instead of a mim. Okay, pukad ten. Make sure I got a sagol there. Pukad tem, pukad ten. And so we have, let me actually just scoot that over just a tad, if I can. Okay. So we have propritonic reduction in both of these. Then finally, we have our 1CP. We ran, we sat, something. So we have pa, kad, nu. Pakadnu. This nu ending is a CV ending just like these, right? So it behaves just like these three, where you just take the 3MS form down here and you add the ending. This part is just like 3MS. We don't change anything. The vowels don't change. There's no pretonic reduction, no propritonic reduction, or anything like that. Okay, now, why don't we, let's get rid of this stuff here. Let me add some colors. The way to memorize this, first of all, I would suggest this. Learn to say them. Secondly, write them out with the paradigm words. Learn to write them. And then thirdly, it's a good idea to also isolate the endings so that you're aware of what those are. So why don't we color the endings so we know, so we can really see what's going on here. So first of all, 3MS has no ending. 3FS, let's make this pink. 3FS and this one here, if I can select them both. These are our vocalic endings. These are the ones with pretonic reduction. Let's do our propretonic reduction. Okay, these are the heavy ones. See if I can select all this here. Okay, so we have pretonic reduction here because it's just a vowel. Here we have a full CVC syllable, and this is where we have a propretonic reduction. And then the rest of them, we'll color green. So you're going to get these in one fell sweep? I doubt it. Okay, so these are our CV, or at least they're functioning as CV endings. No reduction anywhere. We just add the ending on to the 3MS form. Okay. So we have pakad, pakada, pakadta, pakad, pakadti, pakadu, pikatem, pikaten, pakadnu. Okay. Maybe we should look at this, see what like printed. I wanted to write this out, work through it with you written, so we could pay attention to all the details. if I just showed you this, then it'd be, you may ignore some things. So why don't we actually just, I know we just did this, but we'll review it again briefly. Remember, you have propretonic reduction here. These two, they go together, right? And we have, sorry, I didn't say that right. Pretonic reduction here with that method that may or may not be there, okay? And then we have propretonic reduction here, because these are the heavy endings, and these ones have no reduction. You just add the endings straight on there. So vocalic, CVC, and then CV endings here. Okay, what I suggest, and let me just get rid of this here. What I suggest is that you stop the tape, if this were a tape. Don't go on to the next module until you know this paradigm and know it really well. Because the next module, what we're going to do is take a look at, well, actually the module after next, we're going to take a look at what happens when you have gutturals here. So you put gutturals in this position, this position, this position, and things change. And it's easier for you if you listen to that one after you already know this one. Because if this one's in your head, orally and visually, you can see it, you know the details, then the rest of it's going to make more sense. So sit down, memorize this, memorize it orally. Maybe I should read it to you. Bakad, bakada, bakadta, bakad, bakadti, bakadu, pikatem, pikaten, pakadnu. Okay? Pakad, pakada, pakadta, pakad, pakadti, pakadu, pikatem, pikaten, pakadnu. So say it 20 times over. And then get a piece of paper or a few pieces of paper and write it down. And write it down 20 times. So that you really know what all the vowels are. So that you can reproduce this. You need to be able to reproduce all these little vowels. Okay? If you do that, then the rest of your life is going to be that much easier.
Oké. Nou. Hebben we het gehoord? We mogen niet verder. Wat ik nog mee zit, misschien kan iemand dat even uitleggen, is dit woord, deze. Oh, ja. Ik heb een probleem met mijn muis. Die doet gekke dingen. Die schiet, zoals je ziet, ineens alle kanten op. Deze snap ik. Dat is pekatta. Maar hier heb je twee schwas en ik dacht dat er dan eentje vocaal zou worden.
Ja, hij legt uit.
Oh, die moet je even... Ja?
Hij legt uit dat er was vroeger nog een jot achter, historisch. Maar die is verdwenen. Dus nu wordt het gewoon samengevoegd. En die letters worden aan elkaar geplakt.
Maar hoe spreek je het dan uit? Pekat.
Bekat. Ja.
Dus je spreekt het hetzelfde uit als de eerste.
Ja, eigenlijk wel. Maar dat is meer een zachte D. En dit is meer een harde T. Bekat.
Oké, nou dan moet ik dat nog eens.
Dit staat ook uitgelegd op bladzijde 87 in de kleine lettertjes onderaan.
Oh.
Ja.
Die heb ik nog niet gelezen. Wat staat daar?
Ja, wat Noortje net zei.
Oh.
Ja.
Ja, uiteraard.
Origineel was dat een ander einde, maar dat het aangepast is in de loop van de tijd.
Ja.
Oké.
Ja.
Nou, wat ik wil voorstellen is om dit schema dan uit te schrijven en dan ook met nog 2 andere werkwoorden. Vind je dat goed?
Ja, heb je een voorstel voor een werkwoord? Ik heb ze vroeger geleerd met katol en katal, maar ik weet niet welke jij wilt hebben.
Nou, dat zoek ik nu even, want we hebben zo'n kaart. Tenminste, die... Oh, die heeft Noord.
In het boek staat bij nieuwe woorden. Bij staan er een stuk of 7 werkwoorden. En als je die gewoon allemaal even uitwerkt, dan kom je er wel aardig in hoor.
Oké. Mag ik even kijken? Dankjewel.
Tuurlijk.
Ik bedoel, bladzijde 91.
92 heeft het over en ja. Ja. Oké, nou, zullen we dat dan doen voor de volgende keer? Gewoon uitwerken. Dus die voor alle 7 werkwoorden deze, of zijn het er 7? Ja, ja, het zijn er 7 werkwoorden. En dan voor die 7 werkwoorden deze 9 vormen uitschrijven.
Ja.
Mee eens?
Helemaal goed.
Oké.
Ronald? Ja,
Ronald,
ik
over.
zit een heel verhaal tegen je op. Ik zit een heel verhaal op te hangen, maar ik had mijn geluid uitstaan. Het is wel zo, ik weet niet of er in deze werkwoorden ook gutturals in voorkomen. Want dan worden de regels weer aangepast. Hè? Dus daar moet je wel even aan denken.
Wat zeg je, Noor? Er komen geen gutturals in voor.
Oké. Nou, dan kunnen we dat doen.
Ja.
Ik heb het met 1 werkwoord al gedaan. En het is best wel, als je het een paar keer gedaan hebt, dan gaat het wel steeds makkelijker, moet ik zeggen.
Ja. Oké. Nou. Dan zien we jullie volgende week weer. Was een korte les dan, maar wel belangrijk. We hebben de eerste stap gezet.
Veel huiswerk.
Ja, aan de bak.
Ja, veel zelf doen. Want hij heeft wel gelijk, want daar leer je het van. Door het uit te schrijven, door het te doen.
Oké, lieve mensen. Wees gegroet.
Oké.
Ja.
Ja,
Dag
Doei.
allemaal.
doei.
En we
Ja.
houden jullie wel op de hoogte voor als we wat meer van Hanna
Oh ja,
weten.
Ronald,
Ja?
ik zat net te denken, kunnen we ook niet een gezamenlijk